All right. With that said, Jamie, Bill Barr had some words about Jamie. You may not know, Shahid is one of the heads of Antifa. I hope we're not
Great.
Sam.
Thanks, Sam. That's great. Just
Wow.
what I need. Being Muslim wasn't enough before, huh?
That is the obviously that is a joke.
I appreciate that.
She is the host of Antifada, and sometimes people on Twitter, I guess, misread it and assume that she is the head of Antifa.
A lot of people want to speak to the manager of Antifa right now.
That's right. There's a lot of folks, and one of those people is Bill Barr. And I want to get your opinion on Bill Barr when we come back, because in my mind, he is, if there is one person, maybe it's Stephen Miller, but I think Bill Barr is perhaps the most dangerous individual in our country right now in terms of a threat to democracy. But here he is, basically, more or less delivering an explanation for what's going on that is equivalent to, an email chain that your grandparents or your uncle would get and think is real. I mean, here he is.
The large preponderance of those who are protesting are peaceful demonstrators who are exercising their First Amendment rights. At some demonstrations, however, there are groups that exploit the opportunity to engage in such crimes as looting. And finally, at some demonstrations, there are extremist agitators who are hijacking the protests to pursue their own separate and violent agenda. We have evidence that Antifa and other similar extremist groups, as well as actors of a variety of different political persuasions, have been involved in instigating and participating in the violent activity. And we are also seeing foreign actors playing all sides to exacerbate the violence. The Department of Justice is working to restore order in the District of Columbia and around the nation. Here in Washington, we are working with the local police, the citizen soldiers of the National Guard, and other federal agencies to provide safety and justice. We have deployed all the major law enforcement components of the department on this mission, including the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the Bureau of Prisons, and the U.S. Marshal Service.
So there he is. He's announcing the cavalcade of people who came in without uniforms. And we don't know, like, who is their commanding officer? Like, what is the chain of command? How do we hold these people account? Shahid, give me your assessment of Bill Barr, because when he came in, there was a supposedly a sense of there was an establishment like, well, finally, we have someone who served with George Herbert Walker Bush, and a grown-up has showed up. And my own perspective was just, this guy's like Jeff Sessions, but smart, and that's bad.
Absolutely. He's absolutely a partisan hack. And the idea of the Attorney General of the United States acting effectively as the president's personal lawyer and the head of the Gestapo is no comfort to me. I mean, historically, the Attorney General is supposed to be one of the intra-executive checks, part of our system of these checks and balances, and he hasn't been that at all. The idea, there was a part in his statement where he refers to this litany of agencies being called in to provide safety. And it jumped out at me as particularly preposterous, because as your clips have demonstrated, the one thing the police are not offering, as the murder of George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or any of these names who we say their names precisely because police don't offer safety. That is the point. It's why we're in the streets. And that refusal to recognize reality is kind of like the clip you showed of Cuomo before. We have powerful people telling us that the sky is green and up is down. This is dystopia. This is why I think we are hurtling into a fascist future if we don't stop it now, because it is these kinds of open willingness to just ignore reality and promote falsehood. And in this case, not just falsehood, but authoritarian crackdown. There's nothing more authoritarian than bringing in armed agents of the state who we can't identify, who are unaccountable to any civilian authority, to crack people's heads in the street. And one of the clips in particularly showed the one of the man who was doing the interview with local police, who was then, run down from behind when he wasn't looking. That's not just a violation of an individual's rights. Once you have them on camera, and we're talking about the press, that's a press restriction. We're talking about here violations not just of individual rights, but violations of our democracy's rights. It's one reason why I'm so alarmed. I don't think we're looking at these. I don't look at this current moment through the lens just of police accountability and just through the lens of civil rights and just through the lens of Black Lives Matter. We are looking at whether or not we will live in a democracy. And, if we ever have a chance to be in stadiums for athletic performances in the future, to meaningfully and mean it when we sing anthems about living in a land of the free and the home of the brave. America doesn't feel so free anymore. And frankly, it hasn't felt free in a long time. For people with black skin, it's never felt free, right? I mean, fascism in some respects has been here longer than the Republic. But now when we see the Attorney General openly embracing the wanton, lawless deployment of paramilitary police to suppress dissent, and, he didn't get into in that press conference, but a further thing that's happened in the last few days, the DEA has been authorized to conduct illegal domestic surveillance agencies are trying to use contact tracing methods to identify and potentially.
CPB was using drones over Minneapolis and who knows what other states. We should also
now
say
they can do contact tracing.
Right, exactly. And in New York, we have legal observers being arrested.
Yep.
And this is, and we should say that the other issue here, and we're going to watch the Democrats, if they take control of the White House, they take control of the Senate and the House, they're not going to hold these people to account, or as currently configured, anyways.
Right.
And
I hope to have a little bit of something to do with that, but yeah.
Yes, I would like to. Honestly, because this creates a baseline of what is acceptable. Like, if you drop this down into 1995, these images, the response is going to be wholly different than it is today. And you're going to have this would, I think, we haven't seen this since the civil rights era, and that's what we would get. And though, there would be more accountability, I believe, then, but we have allowed over time the, images out of Occupy, running out in LRAD, and these things create baselines as to what is acceptable. And the next iteration is going to be worse. And some of what we're getting from these moments are going to linger in terms of the way that we look at the press, the way that we look at protesting, et cetera, et cetera. Very problematic.
It's hard to know what part of the timeline we're in right now from being inside of it, right? Like, if we're the frog in the boiling pot of water, is it 50 degrees? Is it 90 degrees? It's hard to know from inside of it. I have been thinking a lot about Matt Christman's definition of fascism, right? Because even people who study fascism for a living struggle to fully define what it is. So there are many definitions floating around out there. But how
did he define it?
One of his definitions was when an empire, usually a dying one, brings colonial tactics home amid crisis and uses them on its own citizens. Now, this has already been happening for immigrants and people of color in this country, but it does feel like an escalation of that, and it feels like it tracks with that definition. I mean, all of these rights that we're talking about, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, they're contingent on a lot of factors. Like, we have exactly as many rights as we can take for ourselves. So while it is good to have a Bill of Rights and a Constitution to give people some idea of what they're entitled to and what they deserve, we have to be actively protecting those rights. Otherwise, they can absolutely go away in a second based on who's in power and the needs of capital.
Speak it. And just to press on it there, part of the other prerequisites, the ingredients we might need in the soup for those rights to have meaning include an independent judiciary, include political actors who will put in place statutes and laws to effectuate those commitments. And it's exactly what we don't have now. In most cities, we don't have prosecutors who are willing to prosecute the cops. We haven't had policymakers who are willing to engineer laws that would hold police accountable. And the judges generally have been appointed either by right-wing despots from George Bush to Donald Trump, or Democrats ducking into the face of that, into the punch of that right-wing takeover of the courts by nominating, prosecutors who just happen to have diverse skin. There's another piece here just to press on this, and that what we see at the moment with this military crackdown, that's the visible part of fascism and authoritarianism. We've sort of hinted at this, but there's a whole other invisible part of the fascism. And I think that relates to the secrecy and the surveillance, secrecy inhibiting Congress and the courts from doing their jobs, and surveillance silencing people. A lot of people have thought about surveillance as a privacy restriction, and it does violate privacy, but it's more than that. I would invite people to think about surveillance through the lens of the police violence that we've seen in the last week. Surveillance is the nail in a coffin of democracy. It is the thing to make sure that vulnerable people can't speak out. Because if we can't even be in the streets because we're going to be physically attacked by our paid public servants, then at least we should have the right to speak, right? Well, surveillance is the thing that then shuts down that lever. So we have to think about these problems intersectionally. It's not just police violence making the streets unsafe. It's also government surveillance and oppression making speech unsafe. And when you put those things together, the whole is frankly much worse than merely the sum of their parts.
Yeah, Barr basically referred to, messages about coordination and plans. Like, where'd those come from? Like, it's not like they went to, blogspot.antifa.com and saw that they're out there. It's the surveillance is a implicit, maybe explicit threat. We don't even want you guys talking about this stuff, because if you do, we're going to find out about it. And then it's a problem.
Yeah, that's why we're all using Signal right now, which is a horrible app, and I hate it. The only good thing about it is the encryption.
Can I press on that really quick? Just the value of encryption. Having worked at EFF, this is a thing I had a chance to work on for a few years before running for Congress. And it's important to note now, digital security praxis can often itself become an object of, it's a rabbit hole. There's a lot to explore there. And a lot of people take advantage of those tools, and too many people don't. And I just want to impress upon folks the value of encryption and encrypted tools to keep your communications and particularly your associations safe. And there's a principle here just to press on. A lot of people will say, I have nothing to hide. Fine. But the people that you communicate with might. And if the people that you're organizing with as an organizer include undocumented folks or include people who are at risk, it's really important as a vicarious commitment to their safety to embrace encryption. And, whether it's Signal, there are lots of other tools out there, from virtual private networks. Tor can be a useful tool. Just to throw out there, rather than inundate people with tools, there are some learning resources available online. I particularly point people to EFF's Security Education Companion and Surveillance Self-Defense Guide. They were put together largely for this scenario, so that people would know how to stay safe and protect their communications and their associations from government scrutiny. And it becomes especially important at a time like this.
Turn off your fingerprint and face recognition to open up your phones, incidentally, too, if you're going out there, folks. Right? Am I right about that? There's a different standard.
Yeah. They can't make you enter your passcode, but they can make you put your finger on the fingerprint thing. So you want to turn that off.
There you go.
What was I going to say? I don't know. It's scary. Like, I don't trust this government to follow the Constitution. I don't trust them to protect my rights, even if all I'm doing is peacefully protesting against the system. So, yeah, you can't be too careful.